Hi everyone, my name is Robin. I am head of digital delivery at the Financial Times, which is also a job title that mostly people don't know what I do half the time. But what it mostly means is that I lead a group of digital editors that we call creative producers. And our team was sort of founded and really probably exists to help the newsroom solve a problem, which is to help reporters and editors think more digitally about stories. And fundamentally, the change that we want to make is to help change the way stories are commissioned, and so to change how stories are thought about from the very beginning. And the way that we kind of like to think about it is that we want to get reporters and editors at the start of a story to stop asking how many words do I need to file for this, and start really thinking about what is the best way of telling the story, using all of the tools and formats and platforms and ways of telling stories that we have at our disposal. This might seem straightforward, but actually it can be a really daunting and difficult question to try to answer when, for example, as an editor or reporter, you don't really know what we can do and what we can't do. So, the story, the best way of telling it, I think maybe, can we do it in VR? The answer is probably no, but what is possible? And when you have that question, you might not actually know who to ask and who to talk to. We have sort of 550 journalists in our editorial department. We're a global newsroom. You might not have a history or a culture of collaborating with other desks and departments. And also, you just might not be even in the same office or time zone as them. You might be in New York, you might be in Hong Kong, you might be out in the field. I was a Taiwan correspondent in an earlier life. And when you do manage to find the right person, sometimes we kind of forget that editors and reporters might just not have really the right words or the right language to describe sort of what they have in their minds. So I've seen sort of editors default to just saying, can we have a cool thing on the internet, right? Can we have an interactive-y thing? And they might not actually really be thinking about anything that requires interaction at all, but they don't have the right words to describe it. And of course, being journalists, you're always under deadline and under time pressure, and the story that you're thinking about what's the best way to tell might be the sixth story that you have to deal with on that day. So we had to come up with a solution that sort of met all of these constraints and do it in a way that would sort of make an impact and be able to work for a very large newsroom that's spread all around the world. And actually, I forgot a bit. I'll talk about the solution in a bit. But what all of these things add up to is that it means that oftentimes when we default to just a very standard news article or a very standard news analysis article, is not for want of trying, it's not for want of creativity, and it's not for want of willingness. It's because there's just huge execution risk. If you think I've got an idea, you just don't know if you can get it done within the time constraints that we have. So our solution to this is a set of templates that we call the Story Playbook. They're basically preset layouts that combine text, photos, and graphics. They're meant to sort of, we have different layouts for different scenarios and different situations. And the idea is to just make it really, really, really easy for any reporter and editor to do something different, and also hopefully something that is better for the readers, is clearer, it presents the information more structured in a more structured way, in a clearer way, and that they know that it can happen. We have 5 templates so far. I'm not actually going to go through what each of those are in detail, but if they're not sort of self-explanatory from their name, feel free to ask me about it and I'll explain afterwards. We've developed all of these templates with a pretty FT-specific context in mind, but we're actually really curious about whether the thinking that we've put into designing these templates and what it's good for and when we can use it for might actually be really helpful for everyone else, and also to see how other people can take it and sort of develop it and make other really cool things with it and take it in really interesting directions. So as of last week, we've actually released them publicly on GitHub, and you can all take it, use it, adapt it. This short link at the bottom takes you to the GitHub page where there's an explanation of what they are, and you can download the guides. So before the next bit, I want to actually take you all back sort of 7 or 8 years ago to around 2012. I had just arrived in London at the time, but it was a really exciting day in the EFT newsroom when we got what was back then the latest, greatest, most amazing new innovation in digital storytelling, which is we were able to make slideshows. So as a reporter and editor, you could get a bunch of photos together, write some captions for them, and cobble them together and publish them as a story. You know, the concept of the slideshow story was born. It was very exciting for everyone. And in some ways, it was really good. But what kind of happened was that it became the default answer whenever someone said, we should do something digital with this story, right? And so pretty soon, everything became a slideshow. Everybody got really tired of slideshows and sick of them, and we mostly sort of banned them and stopped using them. This taught us that, you know, like oftentimes it's not actually really about the tool itself and what it can and can't do and what it enables, but sort of how you introduce it, how you teach people how to use it judiciously, and how you onboard them. So when we were creating the Story Playbook templates, we were really cognizant of this fact and wanted to make sure we avoided the fate of the slideshows. So we did some things differently. People really matter, so my team of creative producers, they're digital editors, they're embedded onto many of our main news desks, and they're sitting there. And by having these people on the desks, I got essentially early adopters and chief evangelists on the desks. So, you know, they report to me, so they have to be excited about it. They're also expert users of this playbook templates. They're beta testers and are able to point out, you know, flaws really early on about how the templates were structured and what it's good for, and, you know, when it doesn't really work. And they're user researchers. So, you know, they're editors on the desk, they're editing stories, they're sort of observing what's coming in and coming through. And when they spot repeatable patterns, they can say, hey, shouldn't we make that into a template? And then we can. We don't want people to abuse and overuse them, but we do actually want people to use them in the first place. And so I think ease of use still does really matter. Each of these templates are built into our content management system. For those people who are in newsrooms that use Methode, this will look really familiar and probably conjure up nightmares. This is the dialog box that pops up when you click the Create New Story button, right? And the base story is there, but also each of the Story Playbook templates. And so it's literally, I want a new story, I want the photo essay template, and then fill in the blanks. We don't want people to overuse and abuse them, so we provide a lot of guidance. We provide a lot of instructions in and FAQs in the guides that we've written. We've distributed them, we talk to editors about them, but in a way, none of those really matter if you don't get the instructions and the nudges to them when it's most useful, at the moment when they are actually creating the story. So this is what you kind of see when you open up the Charticle template, and as you type in your intro, which will just overwrite this text that's highlighted in yellow, you see the instructions to please keep your intro below 200 words if possible, keep it short. And data matters. So like 7 years ago when we introduced the slideshows, we had none of the foundations really in place to actually track even how many slideshows we created, let alone whether they actually performed well, you know, what effect did they have on storytelling, on reader engagement, and all of that sort of stuff. It's obviously very different now. So one of our main measures of success for the Story Playbook template is an internal metric that we developed called the quality read percentage. And what this metric tells us is, of all the people that landed on this article, what proportion of them do we believe have read at least half of the story? And we estimate that using time on page and a whole bunch of other things that we blend together. And so, you know, it's a good thing that the bars are this way around, because if they were flipped around, then we would probably have scratched the playbook. But it's nice to see that it has an uplift on engagement. Data is also really useful when we think about iteration and further development and what else we can do and how we improve things. So this is just thinking purely about distribution and promotion, right? So you're just thinking about page views, how many people you can get to these articles. And it's pretty clear that 3 of them get promoted and distributed quite a lot. They get onto the homepage, they get pushed out on social media because lots of people look at it. 2 of them really don't. So I don't know the answer, but clearly the question is why, and what can we do to fix it? Next bit I want to talk about is sort of that one of the really key functions of why we introduce these tools is not just reader facing, it's actually internal facing. We wanted to use these tools to start to create some culture change and to start to create a sort of mindset change within the newsroom. And so that's where I have my prop. At the FT, we actually have a lot of jargon, and we have a lot of common terms that people at the FT all understand. And so this is the skyline, this is the basement, and that's the cat flap. And there's a gazillion other terms that anybody who's been at the FT for a while will sort of like instinctively know what they mean, and people throw them around. And
the FT has
thing
a cat
about all
flap?
of these terms, or quite a lot of them, is that they have print origins. You know, they exist because of the physical newspaper. We don't really have equivalent terms that have digital origins. And so one of the things that the playbook is designed to do is to start introducing some digital jargon, basically, into the newsroom. And so it was a real milestone of success for me when I walked around the newsroom one day and just overheard people going, hey, should that be a profile card? Or, you know, what about doing a timeline for this? And the speaker clearly expected whoever was in earshot besides me who was passing by and eavesdropping to actually understand what they mean. And so that starts to shift the culture. And another way is that quite a lot of these templates are actually specifically designed to encourage certain types of behavior. So I'm just going to take one of them as an example. This is the reader response template. It's an article that curates and collects together the best of reader responses, either in callouts or in comments. We made it because we thought it was a nice thing to have for readers, but we also made it because, generally speaking, we take a kind of fire and forget attitude towards publishing articles, right? You write the story, you edit the story, you get it ready, you publish it, and you move on to the next story. From an audience engagement perspective, we want to encourage writers, reporters, and editors to engage our subscribers in a conversation in the comments by either participating in the comments or by asking a question or specifically doing a call out. By having a template, it does two things. One is that when you are a reporter and editor and you're creating a new story, one of the options there is reader response. And you kind of sort of jogs your mind that, oh yeah, call outs, you know, that's an option. And also, after you do a call out, doing a reader response story, that's an option too. And the other thing is that it really helps Lila Raptopoulos, who's our community editor, who we developed this jointly with. Lila's job is to help encourage readers and reporters and editors to do more of this, but she's one person, and there's 500 other journalists in our newsroom, and just having the template helps her start the conversation to say, hey, for this story, why don't we do a call out and a reader response? And it's less likely that people will go, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Because we've already introduced the reader response template into the newsroom. One thing we've learned and we've seen is that once you release even sort of quite simple and straightforward tools into the wild, people start hacking them and using them for cool and unexpected and new ways, which is amazing. So this is, again, the reader response template, which was originally designed, like I said, to collate just the best of reader comments. When Robin Wigglesworth, one of our reporters, was doing an obituary on Jack Bogle, who is a pioneer of passive investing industry, this is a super FT story, we suggested, hey, there seems to be quite a lot of really cool comments underneath the obit you wrote. And a lot of readers are like writing in with when they met Jack back in the day and all of that sort of stuff. Why don't we do a reader response story? And then Robin said, why don't we do one better? You know, I interviewed a whole bunch of actually really famous current fund managers on Wall Street about Jack Bogle, and I've got all these notes and reminiscences from them that's just sitting in my notebook because I couldn't use them in the obituary. Why don't we combine them? And we did that. I mean, I would assume that if you're one of the FT subscribers or readers whose comment got put on there and you're next to some really famous person in finance, that's a really cool thing to see. And so one last thing, we continue to develop new templates. So this is the 6th one. We've just sort of put that out to the newsroom, and actually, give me a sec. We are now releasing that to the GitHub for everyone else as well. So this is our first attempt to do a template that can create something that exists off-platform as well. So it creates a short video, uses animation, so you don't need a cameraman to go out and film anything. Our designers can just take a script and turn it into a short video that explains either a concept or a series of events. And yes, we did make an animated explainer to explain the animated explainer template to the newsroom. So thank you very much. Would love to, you can find that there. Oh, sorry. Going back to, can you go back to my last slide for a sec? Sorry, we'll put it up later. But we did a big write-up, basically. So there's a lot more detail about the design process and the thinking behind it and some of the metrics and sort of measurements and data. It's on the link that was on my last slide, but we can tweet that out and send that out later on for everyone who wants to read it as well. So thanks.
Questions?
Right.
Not just about the FT's cat flap. All right, at the back.
Yeah.
Hi, that's really awesome. How do you make sure that people keep using these resources? Do you have any processes in place to remind people of what they can do?
Yep. So the first step is to actually track it. So I have a dashboard. So it's really great to see that there are at least a couple of uses every single week, and that is pretty consistent throughout. The creative producers, again, play a really big part of it. So, they're on the news desks, they're participating in the planning discussions, they're participating in the commissioning conversations, and so it's part of their jobs to pipe up when the opportunity presents itself and say, actually, can we just do this as a whatever?
Right here.
Hi. How do you incentivize people to keep documentation updated and keep sort of the list of things updated? Like a lot of times in my newsroom, it'll be like, oh yeah, that section of method. No one uses that. Don't ever go near that. So how do you sort of keep all that fresh and keep people aware of what they can use, even if they haven't been told about it, versus what they can't?
Yep. The short answer is I kind of thought that I probably couldn't, so I do it. So, I have an incentive to, make the Story Playbooks a success so that we can start. Because what it does is that, once you democratize it and get reporters and editors to start doing some of this, then it both creates space for some of our specialists to do better collaborations and more in-depth stories and cooler projects, and also jumpstarts conversations for the more sort of advanced collaborations and advanced stuff that we do. So essentially, I'm incentivized because that is part of my job that I can't escape from. Yeah.
Got one over here. Oh, no, you didn't.
Lies.
You talked about encouraging journalists to engage with readers that respond to their articles. One of the traditional mantras, as I'm sure you know, is don't read the comments, because the responses can be very aggressive. And this is something I encountered very recently, and it really affected my mental well-being. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was convinced the BBC would never hire me again. And so I want to know, how do you coach journalists? Because it all sounds very well, but how do you coach them to deal with those really aggressive, nasty people?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not my area of expertise. This is Lila's realm, and a large part of why she's amazing. A large part of why we created her role and appointed her to do it is to help our journalists through some of this. But actually, even today, I just got an email from one of our reporters in China saying, there are these commenters, and they're really aggressive, and what can I do about them? And so it's a combination of different things. So we have a very clear set of guidelines about what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior in our comments, and we enforce them, and we're pretty clear about actually what we will do. And we have more or less 24-hour comment moderation support, and where we feel like we are unable to moderate the comment of a particular story, then we just turn them off. We say, comments are only open if we can have the resources to be able to moderate them. Lila runs a lot of sort of coaching and training for journalists, and we basically sort of just try to intervene whenever a journalist flags something up, intervene as quickly as possible, basically.
One more time. Sorry, crowd didn't hear.
Yeah, so what about on Twitter? So when it's not just sort of on our site and under the articles and the comments. We have a much lighter set of guidelines for our journalists around sort of acceptable behavior on Twitter and what they should do when they come across sort of abuse and other nasty things on Twitter. Again, this isn't really sort of my area of expertise, but it's probably an area that we could do a bit better at. but we've mostly been pretty light touch in terms of, we also don't really regulate our journalist behavior on Twitter as much as well. So we've kind of left it as a space of, please be reasonable, shouting for help and get help if you need it. But social media is a bit more left up to the journalists. And we've not, to my knowledge, come across any really serious issues where that has become an issue. But I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm speaking largely out of my wheelhouse here. And if Lila were here, she might tell you a slightly different story. Yeah.
Any more questions? Got time for one more, I think.
Hi, just out of interest, how many of the templates came from talking to readers, consumers, and how many came from producers within the FT?
Yep. The concept for all of the templates came from talking to reporters and editors and observing what we were doing. We subsequently, after we started getting things going, did a big reader research. So we did a big piece of qualitative research where we surveyed and talked to readers about whether or not they found it useful, and also sort of perceived recall, perceived value. Fortunately, the numbers all point in the right direction, basically. The reason why we didn't source format ideas from readers is partly because we felt like there was enough low-hanging fruit to just start going with. Some of the templates are actually just formalizing things that we've kind of already been doing. When we run out of things that we feel like are a good idea, so it's basically the way we're doing it right now is we come up with a bunch of things that we think are a good idea. We put them into place, and then we look at the data and we see if it works or not. At some point, we're going to run out of those ideas, we're going to sort of start to ask. But it's also really hard. I mean, I think what you might get from surveying readers is sort of problem statements. We feel like you don't do a good enough job at catching us up to what has happened on this story, right? But you're less likely to get from readers, what would be a great idea? A timeline story to solve this problem. And so I think just based on a lot of journalism research out there, it's pretty clear what some of the deficiencies of explanatory journalism are. And we still have a lot of runway to go where we can just sort of try to come up with an experiment with new formats.
Okay, we should be wrapping, but Jane, I saw you waving. You have one more question? No? Yes? All right. Liz is behind you with a microphone. She's coming, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, thanks, Robin. What is it that really makes this resonate with the journalists in the newsroom? What is it that they see as being a successful use of the templates?
I think that it's a combination of being... it's a combination of, I hope, we've made most of the templates pretty obvious as to what it's for. And so if you've been commissioned to write a runners and riders story, it's people who are in the running for something. So, who are the candidates to be the next Prime Minister of Britain? And sometimes as a journalist, you get commissioned to do that story, right? It's pretty obvious that there's a format for doing that. And so that helps. It helps for them to be able to say that they're digital, to say that we're not just doing something that's for print. We're forward thinking. We're using the templates. We're with the program. That's good. And I think that oftentimes it's actually less work. So compared to researching and writing an 800-word story, a lot of the templates basically just distill it down into, you just need 4 quotes from these people. You need to know the overall context to explain what it is that you're introducing, and then you can whack it all in and you can do it really quickly. So a combination of sort of time saving, of being able to sort of do something digitally native that is useful and good, and a clear match between sort of intent and form.
Awesome. Robin, thank you very much.
Thanks.